Alright, first and foremost, I'm going to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushua, Ba'ashem Yakadosh, and double honors to the elder bishops and apostles of Great Millstone that taught me this truth. Another week in, week out, doing the work. And today I want to start going off talking about Ezekiel, the 37th chapter. Actually, let me turn up the brightness a little bit. I'm going to start talking about Ezekiel chapter 38. Because this is essentially what we're seeing right now is, the beginnings of World War III. And it was written in Ezekiel the 38th chapter how this was all going to take place. It was also written in Revelation. It talks about the three woes, woe, woe, woe. And it says that the second woe is past and the third woe cometh quickly. So, all these things are prophesied. And what we're seeing right now are the prophecies taking place. As it says in Habakkuk, that at the end it shall speak and not lie. So, when you go to Ezekiel chapter 38 and verse 1, it says, the destruction of Gog. And the word of Yahweh came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against them. Now, when you go into, what land masses those were, if you were to look on an ancient map, it would be what today is considered, Russia. That's where Gog and Magog were originally at. So it's talking about the Russians. Also, when you go into the word Russia, it goes back to the word Rosh, which means chief prince, as it says right here. So it says, and say, thus saith Yahweh, behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws, and will bring thee forth in all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company, with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. Right, so Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai is going to bring back Russia to that war mentality, okay, to that Cold War mentality of fighting, because for a while they've been, docile. They haven't really been causing too much trouble as they used to. The only thing recently is just that whole thing, with Ukraine. But eventually, the Most High is going to put it in their spirit to really turn it up, because as it says, Proverbs chapter 21, let's get that. Proverbs chapter 21. In verse 1, it says, the king's heart is in the hand of Yahweh, as the rivers of water, he turneth it whithersoever he will. Right? So when you go to the word heart in the Hebrew, it goes into the Hebrew word lab, which means mind. Okay, the king's mind is in the hand of the Lord, and he turneth it whithersoever he will, going into how he's in control of everything. You go to Daniel chapter 4, and you see the same point, reiterated. It's just a lot of dust, outside right now. So, Daniel, I'm not trying to miss my page. Daniel chapter 4, and verse. Right, Daniel chapter 4 and verse 17. It says, this matters by the decree of the watchers, and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High Yahweh ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the bases of men. Right, and that's what we see right now is how the bases of men have been placed in authority, which goes into the Edomites. Right, it all started with Alexander the Great. From there, you read in First Maccabees, the first chapter, that after he passed away, you know, his kings, his servants, put crowns upon their own heads, and evils were multiplied in the earth, because they are the wicked that the Bible speaks of. But the point is that the Most High ruleth in in the kingdom of men. Okay, and that's what we're seeing right now is how the prophecies are playing out, and the Most High is putting it in the minds of these kings to do these things. So, going back to Ezekiel chapter 38. Ezekiel chapter 38 and verse 4 says, "And I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even of a great company, with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet." Right? So those are going to be part of the nations that are with Russia, right? Which Iran is what was previously called Persia. Okay, Persia is Iran today. Ethiopia, Libya, all of them with shield and helmet, right? So they're going to partake in this war. And you can see how, let me keep reading. It says, "Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togomar of the north quarters, and all his bands, and many people with him." Right? So when you go into Togomar, that goes into Turkey, which we're going to see how, Turkey leaves NATO, EU, all that all together and comes against those nations and really sides with Iran and Russia. It says, "Be thou prepared, and prepare for thyself, and all thy company that are assembled unto thee, and be thou a guard unto them." And that's the point, is that Russia is going to be the face, is going to be the guard, okay, towards these smaller nations. And what we're seeing right now is just the beginning stages, right? The whole thing with America at war with Iran, okay, that's another prophecy of Jeremiah 50. It talks about the least of the flock, we're going to draw them out. In the same way, Iran is going to draw Russia, to World War III. So it says, "After many days thou shalt be visited. In the latter years thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword, and is gathered out of many people, against the mountains of Israel, which have always been waste, but it is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them. Thou shalt ascend and come like a storm, thou shalt be like a cloud to cover the land, thou and all thy bands and many people with thee." Right? So going into how eventually, they're going to attack the Holy Land, right? Israel. These Israelis, the Jewish, okay, which they're really Edomites when you go into it, but an attack is going to be a place over there, right, with Russia, Iran, and those nations. And they're really going to completely, obliterate that landmass. But after they do that, it says, "Thus saith Yahweh, it shall also come to pass that at the same time shall things come into thy mind, and thou shalt think an evil thought." Right? So they're going to have an evil thought, as they're destroying that land. It says, "And thou shalt say, I will go to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, and having neither bars nor gates." Right? So the land of unwalled villages is talking about America, right? The unwalled villages is symbolic for the states. How each state is a village, and there's no literal walls. Okay, the land of unwalled villages, right? And talking about, the people dwelling safely, because that's the mentality, of these Edomites here, these Americans here, is that everything is going to be okay, that they're never going to see suffering, okay, that it's always going to be, $2 McChickens and the 9 to 5 and the, bread and circus. They think that the bread and circus is going to go on forever. But, when you actually go into the whole concept of the bread and circus in Rome, it was meant to distract the masses of what was going on in, the political system. So it's the same thing today. All that bread and circus and the fast food and the entertainment, the fact you got sports year long. Okay, once soccer season is done, you got basketball or hockey or baseball, nonstop free entertainment. It's to keep you distracted from what's really going on and to keep you comfortable, right? Because it's shown how if you're comfortable, you're not going to grow. Okay, if you're comfortable, you're not going to seek change. You're going to stay exactly where you are. That is the people here in America. So it says, "And thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates, to take a spoil and to take a prey, to turn thine hand upon the desolate places that are now inhabited, and upon the people that are gathered out of the nations, which have gotten cattle and goods that dwell in the midst of the land." Right? So to destroy. Okay. And that's exactly what's going to happen is this place will be destroyed by thermonuclear missiles. Okay. So let's now go to Jeremiah 50, speak on that. So Jeremiah 50 and verse Jeremiah 51 and verse 1. It says, "Thus saith Yahweh, behold, I will raise up against Babylon and against them that dwell in the midst of them that rise up against me a destroying wind." When you go into what that destroying wind is going into the nuclear shockwave. Okay, it's gonna make uh, essentially, just as you see in the movies, that shockwave go and just start destroying everything. Which when you go into Isaiah 14, okay, it's referred to as the besom of destruction. Let's get that. Isaiah 14 and verse 21. Actually, I'll start at verse 22. It says, "For I will rise up against them, saith the Yahweh of hosts, and cut off from Babylon the name and remnant and son and nephew, saith the Yahweh. I will also make it a possession for the bittern and pools of water, and I will sweep it with the besom of destruction, saith the Lord of hosts." Right? And that word besom goes into a broom, okay, sweeping. He's going to sweep this place with the broom of destruction, which is those nukes. So, going back to Jeremiah 51 and verse 1, that's the destroying wind, that it's talking about. So, it says, "And will send unto Babylon fanners that shall fan her, and shall empty her land, for in the day of trouble they shall be against her round about." Right, which that is the same point, reiterated. Those fanners is going to be those nukes, right? And it says that it's going to be round about. Okay, all nations eventually will turn and shoot missiles upon this place. Okay, thus say the scriptures. Okay, even the allies of America are going to shoot missiles on this place. Now, when you go into Revelation chapter 17, Revelation chapter 17 and verse 16. So actually, I'll start at verse 12 because it goes into the beast with 7 heads and the 10 horns. Now there are multiple videos going in explaining what that beast is, but essentially the beast is going into this system. Okay, the American system that with NATO and EU is the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. But the 10 horns go specifically more into NATO and EU, okay? Because they started, I think it was NATO started with 10 nations. It was either NATO or the European Union. So, verse 12 says in Revelation 17, "And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast." Right? So these 10 horns, right, they receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast, and they didn't have strong established kingdoms. Right? And that's going into, like I said, it's I forgot it's either NATO or EU started with 10. How the whole concept is you attack one of these allies, you attack them all. And that's, them having power as kings 1 hour. right? Because it was going to be temporary. It says, "These have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast." Now, when you jump down to I'll start at verse 14. I'll keep going. It says, "These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. And he saith unto me, The waters which thou sawest, where the horse sitteth, and peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues." Right? So when you go into the whore, okay, it's talking about Babylon the Great, and it's America. So it says, "And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire." Right? So at one point, these 10 horns were allies with America, Babylon, the whore. But there's going to be a time where they turn, okay? Where they're going to actually burn this place with fire. It says, "For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth." Right? So, showing you it's not talking about an actual woman. It's all symbolic for kingdoms. So, going back to Jeremiah 50, Jeremiah 51, it talks about how, in the day of trouble, they shall be against her round about. Right? So this place is going to receive missiles from everywhere. It says, and I'm going to actually go down and jump. So jumping down to verse, actually going back to Jeremiah 50, this is the point I want. Jeremiah 50 and 9, it says, "For lo, I will raise and cause to come against Babylon an assembly of great nations from the north country, and they shall set themselves in array against her. From thence she shall be taken, their arrows shall be as of a mighty expert man, and none shall return in vain." Right? So the nations, okay, are going to assemble themselves and shoot arrows upon this place. And that's symbolic, once again, for those missiles, okay? And you can see how it's the same point being reiterated, being explained in different ways over and over again, because that is the day of the Lord. Okay, the day of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai is when the heavens being on fire. That's 2 Peter 3. Let's get that. The heavens being on fire, everything gets destroyed. And I just gotta get to 2 Peter just because it quite literally says that exactly as I was trying to quote it in my own words. Right, this is 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 10. It says, "For the day of Yahweh will come as a thief in the night, in the which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up." Right, so that's the end all be all. Is the elements melting with fervent heat, right? Nuclear destruction. And when you go into, I believe it's Isaiah 24, Isaiah 26, it talks about, the earth reeling to and fro like a drunkard, right? And how the islands were going to be moved out of their places, Revelation 6. And that's all, talking about that one event. So it says, "In which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up." Right? So mass destruction. And that's, what Yahushua spoke about how, you know, I don't remember if it was, I think it was Yahushua how, the last time it was by water, but this time it's going to be by fire. And it's going to be nuclear fire. Right? Something that the world has never seen fully, on that global scale yet. They saw a little glimpse of it, with Japan and what they did, but they haven't seen the full scale nukes go out. Right? They have even bigger nukes than what they dropped, okay, that day. So when you go into Revelation 6, Revelation 6 and verse 12, okay, this was John saying the exact same thing, but he explained it in his terms, what in the way that he could understand what he was seeing in the future. So Revelation 6 and 12 says, "And I beheld, and he had opened the sixth seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood." Right, that earthquake is going into, that nuclear shockwave. Okay, it says, the sun becoming black, going into how the heavens, are going to be that nuclear ash, right? A nuclear winter, heavens being covered with all the smoke. It says, "When the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs, when she is shaken of a mighty wind." Right? So, stars of heaven is going into your missiles. Okay, they're going to be dropping as figs. Okay, left and right and over here. Right? Unpredictable. Because that's one thing is that there is no defense system to be able to guard those missiles. Right? The technology they have, the hypersonic missiles, okay, missiles that are able to move in the air, and change directions. They don't got technology to defend against that, right? And even they do, if they do, it might be one missile they defend, but what about the other 50 that are on the way? So, the Most High has made it where you know America is not going to be able to defend themselves from what's coming, and the reason is because it's the judgment of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai. So it says, "And the heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places." So this is John seeing that nuclear mushroom cloud. Okay, he described it as a scroll being rolled together. Okay, that was his way of describing what he was seeing. It says, "And every mountain and an island were moved out of their places," right? Because it's going to cause, that nuclear shock wave, from the point of impact, all around. And it's not just going to be one, okay? It's going to be multiple warheads dropping, simultaneously, okay, worldwide. Because as soon as those missiles come this way, and they're going to shoot missiles, they also the other ways, right? Probably Russia, which I remember, if I remember correctly, I think there's this policy or this law how every single president has to sign how if there was nuclear war, America would shoot missiles at every single nation in order to ensure that when everything settles down, that they're the last one standing, right? So it says, "And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains." Right? So this is John seeing how people are going to be running towards those bunkers, right? Hiding from the nuclear destruction, trying to hide. That's the point. And some are going to be able to get in those bunkers and survive. They're going to be able to go, into near Earth orbit, okay, and survive. But we're hey, once Yahushua comes back, he's going to give his men, starting with the men, he's going to give the elect, starting with the elect, those new bodies to be able to do all types of spiritual powers. And we're going to literally grab those elites and those peoples in those bunkers and drag them out. Okay, thus say in Isaiah. Let's get that. Let me finish this before I go there. It says, "For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand?" Right, so this is part of the day of the Heavenly Father. So when you go into Isaiah chapter 24, Isaiah 24 and verse, right, 19, it says, "The earth is utterly broken down, the earth is clean dissolved, the earth is moved exceedingly. The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard, it shall be removed like a cottage, and the transgression thereof shall be heavy upon it, and it shall fall and not rise again." Right, and going into the falling and not rising again is going into these kingdoms. Okay, these nations, once the Third World War takes place, they're not going to be in power ever again. It's going to be the kingdom of heaven, which is the Israelites ruling forever. Okay, that's spoken about in Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 2. I'll hit that real quick. So Daniel chapter 2 and verse 44 says, "And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever." Right? So that's what's coming. Right? It's going to be in the days of these kings, at the last kingdom, which is the kingdom we're in right now. Okay, when you go into Daniel chapter 2, Daniel chapter 7, it talks about, four beasts coming up out of the water. Okay, and these four beasts were symbolic for kingdoms that were going to rule the earth. The last beast before the kingdom of heaven was the Roman Empire, which right now we're still in that fourth beast. Okay, America is the reborn Roman Empire when you go into it. Okay, so when you go into Daniel chapter 7 now, we'll give you the same, point in a different way. Daniel chapter 7 and verse 26. I'll start at verse 25. It says, and he, yeah. I'll start at verse 25. It says, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given unto a time and times and the dividing of time. Like going into how these Edomites, they've been in power, and how we were, enslaved as a nation for around 350 years. Okay, and that's when the truth came out. It started around 1612 when the first Negro slave ship landed on the shores of America, and roughly 350 years later, the truth came out of Harlem, New York. Okay, the awakening started taking place. Okay, 1970s around there. So it says, but the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and to destroy unto the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness, and the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom and the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Right, so that's what it's going to be for. Okay, it's going to be for the saints of the Most High, and this kingdom is not going to be left to other people. Okay, I believe it says that in Daniel chapter 2. If we go back, in Daniel chapter 2 and verse 44, it says, and in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. Right, because it's going to be for the Israelites. Right, so-called Latinos, Negroes, Native Americans as a collective, and those that have been scattered abroad throughout all four corners of the earth. Right, this is not a black thing. Okay, this is a nationality thing, a race thing. Okay, it's about the lineages. It's about the tribes. Okay, because everyone goes back to a specific lineage. Right, there's 18 different nations on the earth. When you go back, going to Moabites, Ammonites. You got the Judites. So 18 different nations. Right, this whole concept of the white and the black and the yellow, that's new. Right, at one point they were saying, oh, um, what's his name? Like Herod the Great. Herod the Great was an Edomite, and his father's name was um, um, I think it was Philip the Edomite, if I remember correctly. But something the Edomite, Antipater the Idumean. That was his name. So the dad of Herod, his name was Antipater the Idumean, because that was their way of pretty much identifying themselves. Well, he's a Edomite. He's an Israelite. He's a Ammonite, Moabite. But all that has been taken away because the wicked are in authority, and they've changed the times and the laws. They've committed iconoclasm, which is changing, defacing the picture of the saints. Whitewashing history. All that has taken place. So You know, this is why the earth needs a new management, because everything is backwards. So you go back to Isaiah 24 and verse 20. It says, "The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard, and shall be removed like a cottage, and the transgression thereof shall be heavy upon it, and it shall fall and not rise again." Right, going into the kingdoms of this earth, right, these other nations. It says, "And it shall come to pass in that day that Yahweh shall punish the hosts of the highways that are on high, and the kings of the earth upon the earth. And they shall be gathered together as prisoners are gathered in the pit, and shall be shut up in the prison, and after many days that shall they be visited." Right? So these kings are going to be put in shackles, which that's going to be part of us going and getting them out of those bunkers. Right? Because when you go into Jeremiah 16, talks about that. Jeremiah 16, in verse, I'll start at verse 16. It says, "Behold, I will send for many fishers, saith Yahweh, and they shall fish them. And after will I send for many hunters, and they shall hunt them from every mountain and from every hill, and out of the holes of the rocks." Which that first part is taking place, right? The Most High sending fishers, which really goes into the prophets, the 144,000. That's why, the Messiah said, he was going to make them fishers of men. So the fishing is taking place, but eventually the hunting is going to take place. And that's, where scriptures such as Psalms, the second chapter, take place. Right? Let's get that. How it talks about how he was going to give us the heathen for our inheritance. Psalms chapter 2. Right. Psalms chapter 2 and verse 8, it says, "Ask of me, and I will give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron, thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel." Right? And this same point is reiterated when you go into Revelation, the second chapter, by the Messiah. He quoted the same psalm because that's part of the kingdom of heaven, is the Israelites being on top and these other nations being at the bottom. Right? Spoken about in Isaiah 14, how all those that have oppressed thee, are going to be oppressed. So it's the balance, being established. Let's go to Revelation 2 to prove that, because everything has to be proved. It says prove all things. So Revelation chapter 2 and verse 26, it says, "And he that overcometh and keepeth my works unto the end, to him will I give power over the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron, as the vessels of a potter shall they be broken to shivers, even as I received of my Father." Right, so this shows you, okay, that psalm was an end time prophecy. Okay, and it's about those that endure, going into the elect, right? And once you understand, the elect can only be Israelites. So it's talking about, a hierarchy, with these nations being under us and us being on top. So I quoted Isaiah 14. Let me get that. Isaiah 14 and verse 1, it says, "For Yahweh will have mercy on Jacob, and will yet choose Israel, and set them in their own land, and the strangers shall be joined with them, and they shall cleave to the house of Jacob. And the people shall take them and bring them to their place, and the house of Israel shall possess them in the land of Yahweh for servants and handmaids. And they shall take them captives whose captives they were, and they shall rule over their oppressors." So it shows you that this is not a all-inclusive thing. Okay, the Most High has a chosen people, and all nations do not fit that criteria. Even when we read that word, oh, it's to all nations, right? It's talking about the Israelites, because it says in Genesis that um, he was going to make a nation and a nation and a company of nations out of the Israelites. Going into how you got the nation of Israel, right? Which goes back to Jacob. And then you got the 12 tribes, which each tribe is a nation, right? So that's the nation and company of nations that it was talking about. So the point, they shall take them captives whose captives they were, and they shall rule over their oppressors. So us being on top. It says, and it shall come to pass in the day that Yahweh shall give thee rest from thy sorrow, and from thy fear, and from the hard bondage wherein thou wast made to serve, that thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon, and say, How hath the oppressor ceased? The golden city ceased. Yahweh hath broken the staff of the wicked, and the scepter of the rulers. So this all takes place. We're gonna be like, finally it happened. Finally. Because, this is, we're still in captivity. Okay, you can't go wherever you want to go. Okay, you can't do whatever you want to do. You can't say whatever you want to say. Try speaking out against those small hats and see how everything you got gets stripped away. Right? Kanye West was a perfect example. How it had all these billions, but guess what? Started talking about the Jays and they took away his $8 billion deal. So, and just, you know, overnight, they can take everything you got materially. And that's why, there's scriptures that talk about, don't put, your treasures where moth and rust can corrupt, but put them in heaven where, they can't touch them, roughly paraphrasing. So that's what it's all about is, you know, trusting in Yahweh Bashem, Yahweh Shai, and waiting for him to come back, waiting for these prophecies to unfold. Because we don't got power, as individuals to do anything against the system, right? That was the whole one of the contentions back when the Messiah was on the scene is that they wanted to overtake the Romans, right? They wanted to put things into their own hands, and the Messiah was not with that. Okay, if anything, he said, "Hey, give unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, right? Pay your taxes, right? Stay in line until I lift you up, right?" Zephaniah 3:8. Let's get that. Zephaniah chapter 3 and verse 8. It says, Therefore wait ye upon me, saith Yahweh, until the day that I rise up to the prey. For my determination is to gather the nations, that I may assemble the kingdoms, to pour upon them mine indignation, even all my fierce anger, for all the earth shall be devoured with the fire of my jealousy. Right, so that's his will. Okay, he said destroy these nations, but first it says to wait upon him. Okay, to wait because he is the savior, not Malcolm X, not Martin Luther King, which was a sellout and a plan, not all these revolutionaries. And the reason none of those worked is because it says that no man shall buy you, no man shall redeem you. Right, Deuteronomy 28:68. Are we going to be scattered, and no one was going to save us out of this condition, but the Messiah. So that's why it's a waiting game, and the more we wait, the more we see how this is actually taking place. Right, as it says in Habakkuk, at the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come; it will not tarry. So these prophecies are speaking loud and clear, and we can see how, there's a point where the apostles, the great millstone, okay, the brothers who were prophesying, talking about how it's all going to start with the least of the flock, Israel, and how it's going to start from there, and eventually Israel against Iran, and Iran is going to draw America to World War III. And since Russia backs Iran and Israel is backed by America, that's how you get World War III. They were saying that before anything was taking place, and now we're seeing it happening. So the things we say are only going to get shown to be right more and more as time goes on. because the Most High has his prophets out here prophesying, doing the word week in, week out, nonstop, and to be, to be a sign. So let's go into Joel chapter 2. All right, so Joel chapter 2, and I'll start at verse 1. It says, Blow ye the trumpet in Zion, and sound an alarm in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of Yahweh cometh, for it is nigh at hand. And that's exactly, what's taking place right now, what's taking place worldwide, with all the brothers doing the same thing. Is we're blowing that trumpet, letting the people know what's about to happen. And you can see how it's gotten way, way more notoriety. Right? You go on YouTube, you go on TikTok, right? You search it up, and instantly you see all these videos coming up about, the Israelites. You see the prophecies being thrown around. The mark of the beast being the chip. The average person that is in that world knows, who the Hebrew Israelites are. Truly, the name should just be, Christians, because we are the real Christians, followers of the Messiah. But that name, that connotation, Christian, has already been, it's tied to something else. It's tied to the doctrines that we see, pretty much in any church. But Joel chapter 2 and verse 2, it says, A day of darkness and of gloominess, a day of clouds and of thick darkness, as the morning spread upon the mountains, a great people and a strong, there hath not been ever the like, neither shall be any more after it, even to the years of many generations. Right? Because this is going to be the last time this ever happens. Right? After this goes down, there's not going to be any more war. There's going to be peace forever and righteousness established worldwide. And these nations are going to have to follow the laws, or else judgment is going to be upon them. So, verse 3 says, A fire devoureth before them, and behind them a flame burneth. The land is as the garden of Eden before them, and behind them a desolate wilderness, yea, and nothing shall escape them. At which he was explaining, okay, the nuclear destruction. At one point, it was as the Garden of Eden, and on the other side, it was as a desolate wilderness. Because, the grooming action of the fire that is going to take place. So, down to verse 10, because then it goes on to speaking about horses, which that all goes into the missiles. But the point is in verse 10, it says, The earth shall quake before them, the heavens shall tremble, the sun and the moon shall be dark, and the stars shall withdraw their shining. And Yahweh shall utter his voice before his army, for his camp is very great. For he is strong that executeth his word, for the day of Yahweh is great and terrible, and who can abide it? Right, so it's the same thing over and over again. Now that's, the day of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai is tied to the nuclear destruction. It says, jumping down to verse 28. Actually, I want verse 20. Right, so it says, But I